Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, back in session. The trial of Derek Chauvin continues this morning from Minneapolis following an emotional first week of witness testimony. The key officials we're expecting to hear from this week as the gavel drops. Under siege, one Capitol Hill police officer has been killed, another in recovery this morning after a second attack on Capitol grounds on Friday. Now, the Capitol Police Union is urging Congress for more security or risk an exodus of officers. We'll tell you what the union is asking for and how lawmakers are responding. Evacuated, hundreds of families in one Florida community have been ordered to leave their homes and warned that a nearby toxic wastewater reservoir could collapse and flood the area. The latest from Manatee County and what's being done to head off the potential for disaster. And cursed convoy after another brush with trouble in the Suez. Egypt has decided to test the fate of the pharaohs with a golden parade, mobilizing the mummified remains of 22 ancient royals across their capital of Cairo. We'll, of course, tell you the reasoning behind the move and what's next for these curious coffins. And Joe, good Monday morning to you. I'm excited to have Bill Cairns on today because I think we've just got some good news. A beautiful weekend.
Well, yes, I was looking at the forecast and I'm excited. So.
I didn't even wear a coat. Maybe I should ask him if I'll regret that. It might have been a little bit far, but it said later it's nearly 60. So we'll get to the weather forecast in just a little bit. But we begin with the second week of testimony in the trial of former officer Derek Chauvin, who's accused of murdering George Floyd. Jurors are expected to hear from the chief of the Minneapolis Police Department today, who's testifying for the prosecution.
This comes after the longest-serving member of the department testified, saying that Chauvin used top-tier deadly force.
What is your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on a neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger, if that's what they felt. And that's what they would have to feel to be able to use that kind of force.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Minneapolis. So, Shaq, let's start with the testimony we just heard, actually hearing a high-ranking officer within the Minneapolis Police Department criticize Chauvin's actions, saying he used excessive force. How did the defense try to counter that?
Well, in that cross-examination, we heard the defense bring up the fact that Lieutenant Zimmerman hasn't had a patrol, hasn't been on the beat since about 1993. Joe, for a little bit of context, that was the year that I was born. So they said that he hasn't had that foot experience as an officer in some time, and that his experience, his opinion that you heard being given there was based on the fact that he gets trained every year, and rather than the real life application of it. You also heard the cross-examination and the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, point out that officers are trained to improvise in order to protect their lives and the lives of others. So they insinuated or alluded to the idea that Derek Chauvin might have been improvising during that experience, especially in their minds when you see the crowd that they've continuously throughout the trial tried to paint as angry, as this mob that was ready to inflict some harm. Joe?
Shaq, we know the highest-ranking officer, the Minneapolis police chief, is expected to testify today as a witness for the state. Do we know what he's expected to say on the stand?
That's right. We'll go from the most senior member of the Minneapolis Police Department, the longest-serving member in Lieutenant Zimmerman, to the highest ranking, the police chief, the Minneapolis chief of police. Just so you have some context here, this is a police chief that within hours after this video surfaced and went viral, he fired all 4 officers. This is a man who back in May said that he didn't want to be in a room with Derek Chauvin, said he didn't want to say his name. So there are some strong feelings that we know that Chief Arredondo has towards Derek Chauvin in this case. But this also goes to and speaks to the idea of this blue wall of silence starting to break down. We're seeing officer after officer on a senior level come and testify against Derek Chauvin. I talked to a former public defender here about what we're seeing and how unusual this is. Listen to what Mary Moriarty told me.
This is an opportunity for police officers to say, including lieutenants and sergeants, this is not right, this isn't who we are, we disagree with the use of force here. It's also pretty compelling because these aren't use of force experts that are being brought in from the outside. These are Minneapolis Police Department high-ranking officers that are saying this about one of their own colleagues.
And we know it's not just the police chief. In those opening statements, we heard the prosecution tease out multiple officers that will come and speak. So we can continue. There's a chance that we'll continue to hear these officers come up and testify against the use of force that Derek Chauvin used.
And Shaq, you've also learned that the medical examiner who conducted George Floyd's autopsy will testify for the prosecution at some point. Remind us what he concluded and what role that testimony could have in this trial.
Yeah, we're talking about the testimony of Dr. Andrew Baker. He was the only person to perform an autopsy on George Floyd, at least the only person in this county. The family later hired and did their own private autopsy there. But he ruled that this was a homicide. But he also, in his findings, ruled that it was a heart condition. He talked about the medical condition of George Floyd, talked about the vessels essentially being closed off, and his prior heart condition there. So there's some opportunity for the defense to pick up on this testimony, and that's the expectation, that they will use this to continue to poke holes in the prosecution's case, Joe.
All right, Shaquille Brewster in Minneapolis, thanks so much.
Let's now bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Danny, good morning. Now, excessive use of force can be difficult for prosecutors to prove, but it's rare to hear officers testify against one of their own, let alone having the police chief testify for the prosecution. Shaq, of course, as always, just put it very well, saying we're seeing that blue wall of silence come down. How do you think they're doing in making their case so far?
Shaq put it very well. The prosecution is anticipating the defense's two prongs of their defense, which is, number one, causation. The knee in the back of the neck didn't cause the death. It was George Floyd's ingestion of drugs and poor health. But the second prong, and equally as important, is the notion that the knee in the back of the neck was taught. It was part of their training. It was even in the manual. It was a central theme of the defense's opening. And now you see the prosecution whittling away at that defense theme of the idea that the knee in the back of the neck was somehow okay. And they do this by marching in brother officers, high-ranking officers of Chauvin, and those officers saying this was not force reasonable under the circumstances. And that is compelling evidence. By the way, don't forget, police officers are the very best witnesses in the world, better than lawyers. Look at them, watch them as they turn, and look at the jury and talk directly to the jury. They know what they're doing. They're very effective.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about what this can really do to the mind of a jury here, because if the prosecution's arguing that Chauvin didn't follow his training, essentially, to have Chief Arredondo testify, basically the boss from on high say, yeah, that's not training. What does that mean to a jury?
It's compelling. It's not conclusive evidence that the force was unreasonable, but it sure is persuasive. And you have high-ranking and longest-serving. You know, most police chiefs are appointed or hired out of some other jurisdiction. This police chief actually came from Minneapolis. He's come up the ranks himself. So in a sense, he is not a carpetbagger. He's somebody he has equal force, at least in terms of their authority, as the lieutenant who testified on Friday. So this is all very compelling information by people with a lot of experience. It's not conclusive, but it sure is helpful.
Danny, let's now talk about the defense. They're arguing that Chauvin's actions did not cause Floyd's death. How will this testimony from law enforcement officials complicate that case?
It doesn't so much attack that portion of the defense, except that it shows that the knee in the back of the neck was more dangerous than the defense is making it out to be. And if it's more dangerous, it's more likely that it was a substantial factor in causing the death. And that's where the prosecution needs to get to. They don't need to prove that the knee in the back of the neck was the only cause of George Floyd's death. They just need to prove that it was a substantial factor. And if they can do that, all the fentanyl, all the methamphetamines, all the poor health, all the heart conditions, they all dissolve away because that's all the prosecution needs to show is that substantial factor.
Danny, thank you. Thank you. As always, good to see you.
Thank you.
A Capitol police officer is recovering at home this morning. He was hospitalized after Friday's attack, which killed a fellow officer. A crowd cheered for Officer Ken Shaver as he left the hospital over the weekend. This video obtained by NBC News shows Officer Shaver being pushed in a wheelchair with a boot on his left foot before standing up and walking to a car. Officer Shaver was injured on Friday when police say a man drove a car into a security barricade at the Capitol complex. Another officer, William Evans, was killed. Evans was an 18-year veteran of the Capitol Police Department. The driver, 25-year-old Noah Green of Indiana, was also killed. Police say Green was shot after he jumped out of the car with a knife. Let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake for more on the fallout following Friday's attack. So, Garrett, tensions were already high following the Capitol Hill riot in January. Now the union representing Capitol police officers is calling on Congress to take action and step up security. What exactly does the union want?
Well, the union's been calling for a couple of things for a while now. First and foremost is more officers. They've got an authorized force, the union president says, of more than 2,000 officers, and they're more than 200 short of the numbers that they're already authorized to have. They say morale is low, retirements are high, and officers have been working tons of forced overtime. It's not sustainable, they say. And so the first and foremost thing they need to do is hire more officers and keep the folks they have. The second portion of this is something that Capitol Police have been calling for quite some time, and that's to get some kind of more permanent structural physical changes in the barriers, the protections around Capitol Hill itself. Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who was of course tasked with conducting a security review after January 6th, made some comments about that over the weekend and said they're ready to go if Congress is ready to act to fund those changes that he would like to see. Take a listen to the Lieutenant General.
The Corps engineer is standing by to reinforce the outer grounds of the Capitol with the contractors coming in to put advanced fencing that could come out of the ground as required. We've given them the plan. We worked the plan hard. Now it's time for Congress to work the plan.
Now, the action from Congress here would be passing some kind of supplemental spending bill to authorize the money necessary to get this done. Speaker Pelosi says that's something she's interested in doing, but they're still out on recess this week, so it won't happen fast.
Yeah, lawmakers aren't there right now, but are we getting reaction from them in the wake of what happened on Friday?
We are. Lawmakers in really both parties and both chambers have been supportive of the Capitol Police, particularly in that question of hiring more officers, making sure the structure of the department works as it's intended. But there is tension between lawmakers and officers when it comes to making physical changes to the campus itself. Lawmakers don't want to see anything like a permanent fence, particularly like the fencing that was erected around the Capitol in the wake of January 6th. Here's Republican Senator Roy Blunt, who sits on the Powerful Rules Committee of the Senate, explaining his desire not to go down that road.
I think the permanent fencing should come down. I don't think it does the job. In fact, the fencing was right there when the car drove through.
And so you get a sense that for Congress to approve the money necessary to make physical changes, there's going to have to be that direct correlation between here's what a physical change would be, here's how it could prevent another attack like this with those, pop-up barricades, for example, around the Capitol. One of the things they're discussing, they've also put in place just over the weekend, at least temporarily, some more concrete barricades that might prevent another attack like what we saw on Friday.
Garrett, while we have you, let's talk about the actual investigation into Friday's attack. Have officials said anything at all about a possible motive?
Only ruling things out, essentially saying they don't believe this is terror related. It doesn't appear that this attack is even especially political in nature, if that makes any sense. Motive, Joe, I think is still the biggest missing piece in this investigation.
All right, Garrett Hake, we know you'll stay on top of it. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Hundreds of people south of Tampa, Florida, are being told to leave their homes immediately as a toxic wastewater reservoir is on the brink of collapsing and flooding the area. The wastewater pond in Manatee County has been leaking for days. Officials say it could burst at any time, which could flood homes with up to 20 feet of water.
What we're looking at now is trying to prevent and respond to, if need be, a real catastrophic flood situation.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now from Palmetto in Manatee County, Florida. Sam, good morning. This is scary. So tell us, what's the current situation at the reservoir and what's being done to prevent this from actually collapsing, as though it sounds so imminent?
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Savannah, good morning. At some point on Saturday, the calculation and decision was made that they were not going to be able to repair the leak in that reservoir. So plan B is basically to flush all of those hundreds of millions of gallons of water out of the reservoir and into the Gulf of Mexico. That's where we find ourselves right now. They started with 480 million gallons of water. Right now, at least as of yesterday, the last update we got, it was under 300 million. What's been going on these last several days, the Department of Emergency Management here in Florida has been bringing in pumps. The National Guard, Savannah, brought in pumps, 2 of them to go on top of this stack or that man-made pond to flush water out from that vantage point as well. They are doing whatever they can to get the water out as quickly as possible. And it's worth noting, the more that the water levels go down, the less pressure there is on the pond, the less the risk of it actually bursting. But we are in a very critical time period right now here in this next 24 hours where anything is possible, and they're just moving as quickly as they can.
And Sam, what about the people who live in this area? I mentioned that there's these evacuation orders. Are people following? Are they getting out?
Over my shoulder, this is the evacuation zone. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 316 homes that were asked to evacuate. It goes a mile south, a mile north, and a mile east. Obviously, west is toward the water. What I understand is that most people evacuated, but I had anecdotally conversations with folks who were really on the fence as of yesterday. Candace Case is one of them. Here's what she had to say.
As much as I don't want to leave my home just because of worries of anything happening, I'm terrified of my 7-year-old having to go through something catastrophic. It's just not something you expect ever. It's like a movie.
And Savannah, officials here told me that they are seeing people staying behind. They don't think it's a large percentage, but there were some folks who were having parties over the last couple of days, acknowledging that they don't believe this to be a serious situation, or at least they're not following the orders. I don't think that's most people. Candace, whom you just heard from, said she doesn't think it's 50% or more, but it's probably more than a quarter of the folks in there that are staying behind.
Wow. All right. Well, Sam, there was also concern that this water was radioactive, which, again, is terrifying and immediately makes you think Hinckley, California, or Aaron Brockovich or something like that. But they're now saying that that is not the case. I know you asked a very pointed question at the press conference. Is it radioactive? They said no. But it is contaminated water. Are there concerns about the area's water supply or the potential environmental impact here?
Not the water supply, according to officials, but the environmental impact, absolutely, because you have to remember there was a phosphorus mine there that they were using to get material for fertilizer. So the byproducts of that, some of them are nitrogen and ammonia. Now, what officials from the Department of Emergency, or I should say Environmental Protection, told us is that it's not actually any radium or dangerous levels of radium that can decay into radon gas. That would be radioactive. They're saying that's not the case, but they do have high concentrations of nitrogen and ammonia. When that gets into the water, Savannah, it can cause algae blooms, it can cause red tide. No one wants to see that. And the exact words that were used by environmental experts, this is not the kind of thing you'd want to be swimming in either. Savannah?
Oh, all right. Sam, thank you so much.
Airports looked busy this holiday weekend, and the numbers prove they were busy. The TSA says travel just hit a pandemic record, up more than 800% compared to last year's Easter weekend. Well, health officials warn the fight isn't over yet. More than 17% of the entire U.S. population has been fully vaccinated. That's more than 61 million people. But states from coast to coast are seeing an increase in coronavirus cases in the past 14 days. Let's bring in NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett to walk us through the latest weekend headlines. So, Maura, one piece of good news. The CDC says the pace of vaccinations is picking up, continues to break records. So what are the latest numbers, and what is the Biden administration saying about the vaccine rollout?
Joe, we saw record-breaking numbers over the weekend, and this is a good thing when we see these record numbers when it comes to the vaccine rollout. On Saturday alone, 4 million people vaccinated, and when you look at the average, at the 7-day average over the last week, we're seeing about 3 million people vaccinated per day. So that's obviously rising. Like you said, nearly 17% of people fully vaccinated. So this is really ramping up. But the Biden administration noting that we're also seeing a 20% increase in cases over the last 2 weeks across the country, and so he's reminding reminding folks to stay vigilant. He thinks a lot of Americans have given up the fight. And so he's saying that it's not over yet and we need to still keep fighting. Now, on the other hand, we got new guidance on Friday from the CDC when it comes to travel. You see those major numbers at airports, people clearly trying to get back on the road. The CDC saying that if you're fully vaccinated, you can travel at low risk to yourself, but they are discouraging any of that non-essential travel. So as people are excited to get back out there, vaccinations ramping up. Again, the Biden administration really ramping down on making sure that people stay safe leading into the summer months, Joe.
Now, Maura, the Biden administration also changed the leadership at that Maryland vaccine plant that recently botched a batch of vaccines. What's going on there now?
A bunch of vaccines being millions of vaccines, Joe, and that obviously could really affect the vaccine rollout going forward. And so now the Biden administration putting Johnson & Johnson specifically in charge of this Baltimore plant going forward. They will appoint a senior leadership team that's going to be overseeing the production there. But we won't see any of that product coming out of that specific plant until there is FDA approval for that plant. And that's something that the leadership team is going to be working with closely with the FDA to make sure they can get more of those one-dose Johnson & Johnson shots out to the public.
Maura, we know New York and New Jersey vaccination rates are falling behind in one very important age group. Tell us, which group is that and what's going on there?
Well, this is what's interesting because both New York and New Jersey actually are really high and far ahead when it comes to overall vaccination rates. Each state has about 20% of their population fully vaccinated, but they're falling way behind compared to the rest of the country when it comes to that very vulnerable population of anybody over 65. For whatever reason, they've really fallen off there as the states have expanded eligibility and more younger people have been able to get the vaccine ahead of time. In an effort to fix this, New York is opening some of its mass vaccination sites for anybody 75 and older and any caretakers that come with them. They can walk in to certain city-run sites without an appointment to make sure they can get that vaccine. But this also comes as tomorrow New York's opening up its eligibility for anybody over 16. So there's going to be some conflict there as well. New Jersey also planning to expand its eligibility, but we don't know exactly yet the timeline for when everyone will be eligible in that state. Joe.
Also comes as the tri-state is dealing with high case numbers right now, too. All right, Maura, thank you so much. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Bill Cairns is back with us this week. Hi, Bill. Good to see you. Good morning. And I don't know if you heard, but I didn't bring a coat today. Was I too ambitious?
It just depends on your tolerance level. Because, you know, when we get the temperatures like right around like 55, 60 degrees, some people are like full coat and some people are shorts and T-shirts. Yeah. So it just depends where
somewhere
you are
in the middle.
Spectrum. All right, so let's get into this because we do have a lot of great weather out there and we do have some concerns this week, but we're starting off with this April week very, very nice. The only troublesome weather, it is snowing this morning in areas of northern Idaho and Montana, so it's not great everywhere. We will see some severe storms. April is the second most the month that we had the second most number of tornadoes. May is the peak month. April is the second most. So we will see some severe weather this week. I don't think we're going to get tornadoes today, but later tonight in Minnesota, we will get some strong storms with hail, maybe some damaging wind. Tomorrow, the severe weather threat shifts to areas of Kansas. We'll have to watch areas from Wichita to Tulsa, maybe even Kansas City. And then it looks like if we're going to get any day this week with tornadoes, I think that Wednesday is going to be the day we're going to get the biggest amount of severe weather. We'll have to watch Memphis to Little Rock to Shreveport. And again, this isn't going to be a huge outbreak like the ones we had a couple of weeks ago, but it'll be isolated. So as far as the weather goes, I mean, it's about as beautiful and warm as it gets for early April. 81 in Minneapolis today. That is shorts and T-shirt weather. I can promise you that. 70s all the way into the Gulf Coast. Beautiful Washington, D.C. You notice that a couple areas are a little cool. Boston today, on and off rain, 57 degrees. That's jacket weather. And the Northwest is a little cool, too. And tomorrow, I think even Savannah's putting the short sleeve shirts on in the afternoon. 66 degrees in New York City Tuesday afternoon as the warm weather continues in a good chunk of the country. So a rather nice start for this first week of full week of April, guys.
Yeah, great news. All right, Bill, thank you so much. See you next hour.
Okay.
Coming up, more good news on the vaccination front. Several states are opening up eligibility to those 16 and older today.
Among them, Michigan, how they're ramping up efforts to get residents their shot in the midst of a resurgence of cases. Next.
In the news this morning, the U.S. has closed a section of the Guantanamo Bay prison. Detainees at the once secret Camp 7 were moved to a nearby facility. U.S. officials say the move was part of an effort to cut costs and reduce troop presence at the base in Cuba. President Biden has said that he intends to close Guantanamo, but would need Congress to approve moving prisoners to the U.S. for trial or imprisonment. Currently, there are 40 prisoners at Guantanamo. Newly released police body cam video shows a Louisiana man getting arrested at Disney Springs in Florida for allegedly refusing a temperature check. The arrest report says the suspect, Kevin Sills, tried to bypass the medical screening back in February. In the video, he told authorities he spent $15,000 on his Disney World trip and that he was a Disney stockholder. Sills pleaded not guilty to a misdemeanor trespassing charge. His attorney reached yesterday declined to comment on the matter. And it was a historic night at the Screen Actors Guild Awards, with actors of color sweeping the top prizes. The leading actor awards went to Viola Davis and the late Chadwick Boseman for their performances in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Yoo Jung-yoon won Best Female Supporting Actor for the role in Minari, and Daniel Kaluuya snagged Best Male Supporting Actor for Judas and the Black Messiah. And The Trial of the Chicago 7 took home the night's most coveted award, Best Ensemble Cast in a Motion Picture. Actually saw that one over the weekend.
Oh, you did?
Very good. I enjoyed it a lot.
That is on my list, one of them that I want to see soon. We both have been saying how we need to watch a lot of them, so good job.
We still have a few more weeks to the Oscars.
Yes.
So.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah. Michigan is opening vaccine eligibility to residents 16 and older today. This comes as the state sees a sharp rise in coronavirus cases, and the Biden administration sends more doses to slow the spread. MSNBC anchor Corey Coffin is in Detroit with more.
Good morning. State health officials have made it clear they see a connection between getting people vaccinated in the state of Michigan, as many as possible, as quickly as possible, and tamping down the most recent spike in COVID cases. Now, starting in March, people 16 and up with underlying conditions were eligible to receive the vaccine. And today, anyone 16 and up in the state of Michigan can receive that vaccine. It'll make mass vaccination sites like the one behind us busier as the state looks to open up more vaccination sites with this expanded eligibility. Listen to how one Health and Human Services Department official explained it to me.
Our goal is to vaccinate 100,000 Michiganders a day. That was up from 50,000. What we'd like to do here is equitably vaccinate at least 70% of individuals who want to receive a vaccine.
The problem is supply. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has requested from the White House an additional 60,000 doses this week in response to the emergency spike in cases here in the state. White House has granted that, so they'll receive some 620,000 doses. That is a historic number for the state of Michigan. And they, of course, are joined by more than 20 other states also expanding eligibility around the country as the Biden administration is looking to make every adult eligible for the vaccine by May 1st.
Let's stay on the pandemic and bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. So, Dr. Azar, here's another headline. A new variant first detected in India has been confirmed in Northern California. What can you tell us about this, and how concerned should we be that these variants might prolong the pandemic?
Good morning, Joe. Well, first off, I will say that as of now, the CDC has not rendered this Indian variant as a variant of concern, which is good news. What we do know about it is that it does, in fact, have some mutations in that spike protein, which does allow the virus to enter the human cell. At the moment, we're not, we don't actually have the information about whether or not it is necessarily more transmissible, more virulent, or that it will evade the vaccine. So I think this is another one in the list of variants that experts will be watching closely. But at the moment, I don't think that it's going to be of major concern to us here in the U.S. just yet, Joe.
With more variants popping up, that raises a key question for everyone. What's the likelihood that we'll have to take booster shots? And if we do have to do that, when do you think down the road people might have to get them?
Well, Joe, that's kind of the big unanswered question right now. And that is because we really only have thus far 6-month data on the original Pfizer vaccine trial participants. The good news about that is that at the 6-month mark, participants who received the vaccine still displayed a very robust immune response. It wasn't even starting to wane necessarily to 1/2 or 1/3 of the original amount, which is great news. The issue regarding how long this immunity lasts is not only just how long that immune response lasts to the original or wild type virus, but also how much the mutants could play a role. So at the moment, Joe, we don't know if we're going to need boosters yearly. We don't know if it's going to be another shot of the original vaccine as opposed to a variant specific booster. I imagine it will probably be every few years at this time.
And Dr. Azar, right now, more than 106 million Americans have now had at least one dose of the original COVID vaccine. With more people becoming eligible, including some who'll be eligible today, what do you think fall could look like in the U.S.? What might be the big differences between life in the fall and life now?
So I think, Joe, probably the biggest difference, the way I would frame this is that as we get closer to herd immunity, life is going to start to approximate pre-pandemic more and more. But what I think that looks like is rather than everybody is doing everything without masks, I think we're going to be able to engage in activities but with mask wearing. So I think we're going to start seeing people at sporting events. We're going to start to see people at concerts. But I still think that we're probably going to be masking for a little bit longer than I think most of us would really like to think about. What I'm most hopeful for, of course, as a parent, is that kids will probably be able to be in school mostly full time as that population also hopefully gets vaccinated by the start of the school year, Joe.
I hope people are listening to you, because I saw way too many people this weekend not wearing masks. So.
Me too. Every corner.
Dr. Azar, thank you as always.
Thanks, Joe.
The number of unaccompanied migrant children crossing the border in March smashed the previous monthly record. The number last month topped 18,000 children, according to preliminary Customs and Border Protection data obtained by NBC News. The Biden administration is working to get shelters in place for these kids and says they are, quote, continuing to communicate directly with the region with a focus on finding solutions to address the influx. NBC News correspondent Cal Perry reports from El Paso, Texas.
Hey guys, you know, El Paso has been the center of attention in the migrant immigration crisis in the United States in the past, and it's quickly becoming the focal point again, in large part due to what is called Title 42. Now, Title 42, it's an old law, goes back to 1944, but the Trump administration reinstituted it 13 months ago. It basically says that border agents along the border can quickly expel migrants back to Mexico as soon as they cross into the United States. It's supposed to be basically a COVID protection law. It's supposed to protect Americans against COVID, but activists here on the border say that it's basically a mass expulsion policy, and it puts unaccompanied minors at greater risk because unaccompanied minors are actually exempt from the policy. So families are making the unbelievably difficult decision to send their children across the border alone, giving them the best chance to reach forward to their sponsors here in the United States. Here in El Paso, we are seeing an increase in unaccompanied minors. Fort Bliss, which is nearby here, is actually taking on 500 unaccompanied minors, but has the capacity to take 5,000 in total. Even though Fort Bliss is an Army base, it will be run by DHS. That facility, of which we understand, again, that capacity could grow if the need be. Guys?
Thank you, Cal. Coming up, baseball is back, but not necessarily in full swing.
Yeah, it's more of like a bunt. We'll explain how COVID is impacting opening week next.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in a Jerusalem court this morning as the opening stages of his corruption trial get underway. This just days after an inconclusive election left his political future mired in uncertainty. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with this special focused edition of our international headlines. Hey, Matt, good morning. So the prosecution delivered its opening argument and called the first witnesses. So what are they saying about Netanyahu?
Well, they're saying basically that he's corrupt. Now, Netanyahu already faces 3 different charges of basically mistrust or sort of fraud. One of those 3 charges includes bribery. Now, he's already been indicted on these charges. And as you mentioned, you know, there's 2 really important things that are happening concurrently here. One is the witnesses who are presenting against Netanyahu in that court in Jerusalem. At the same time, Netanyahu's Likud party and other political parties are all working around the clock, trying to negotiate, trying to form a government that they'll then present to President Reuven Rivlin, who will appoint somebody to try to form a government. They'll have a certain amount of time to do so. And if they don't, Israel could go back to its fifth election in just a little over 2 years. If Benjamin Netanyahu is able to stay in power, he could try to manipulate basically the legal system to try to protect himself from some of these very serious charges against him. But guys, you have to remember, this man, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been in the prime ministership since 2009. He is a political survivor. He's likely to survive again. Guys?
All right, Matt, thank you so much.
Major League Baseball teams are welcoming back fans for the first time since the pandemic began, but that doesn't mean everything is back to normal. Some teams are off to a rough start, as NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach explains.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. That's right, baseball is back, and fans could not be more excited to get back to a sense of normalcy. It really does feel like we're rounding third and heading towards home on this pandemic, but there's still a number of concerns that officials are worried about, including down in Texas today, where 40,000 fans will be packing the stadium for the Texas Rangers home opener against the Blue Jays. That's something that President Joe Biden called a mistake in an interview with ESPN earlier this week. Down in Washington, D.C., the entire home opening weekend for the Nationals had to be canceled because of 4 Nationals players that ended up testing positive for coronavirus and others that had to quarantine. But when folks walk into the stadium here at a place like Citizens Bank Park, it's a very different experience for them than the last time they probably went to a baseball game. There is now pod seating, which means there's 4 or 5 feet in between every group of family or friends that goes to the game. There's also cashless transactions, so leave your cash at home, guys, because you can do everything on your phone. Everything from buying a t-shirt at the store to buying a hot dog at the concession stand. And there's also just this excitement and feeling of normalcy that people are really interested in. Here's what some of the folks I talked to had to say.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I've been waiting for this and waiting for this, and I'm just so happy to be here.
It was weird seeing the cutouts in the stands rather than, the fans booing the other team or heckling, rivals, and it's better just to have everyone back in the stands.
Excited about going to the game today? Yeah! That's awesome. You like baseball?
Yeah!
What's it like to be back at the stadium after so long?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Happy
Especially
days.
Today, yeah.
My birthday, and we're celebrating that, and another Phillies victory.
Now, Savannah and Joe, even though more than 100 million Americans have at least 1 dose of the coronavirus vaccine, officials here in Pennsylvania tell me they're still concerned about baseball games like this, holidays like Easter and Memorial Day, causing further spikes. Guys?
Coming up, cursed or kind of cool. Egypt has just transported 22 ancient mummies across their capital of Cairo.
We'll explain why and tell you if this is just the precursor to another Suez Canal incident next. It's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Frank Holland is with us this morning. Hey, Frank, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Hope you both had a great holiday weekend. We're going to start with some social media news. Details from more than 500 million Facebook users have been found on a website for hackers. This information, it appears to be several years old, but is just another example of the amount of information collected by social media sites and how secure or not secure they are. Reports say the data includes phone numbers, Facebook IDs, names, birth dates, and email addresses. Facebook's been dealing with security issues for years. LG Electronics is now getting out of the mobile phones business to focus on making parts for electric vehicles, robotics, and artificial intelligence. The South Korean company was once the world's 3rd largest mobile phone maker, but has lost market share to Samsung and others. It's still number 3 here in North America, but well behind Apple and Samsung. And Tesla reporting record deliveries in the first 3 months of the year, blowing past Wall Street estimates. The company says deliveries, its term for sales, totaled nearly 185,000 vehicles. That's more than double the number from just a year ago when Tesla closed its U.S. factory during the pandemic. Different competition from the likes of Ford and Volkswagen is ramping up pressure on Tesla to speed up its production and roll out new models. Back over to you.
All right, Frank, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good morning.
You too. Good to see you.
Over the weekend, 22 mummies traveled through Cairo to their new museum home. The convoy carried ancient kings and queens. It was a grand parade that even included a 21-gun salute, proof the royal treatment never really expires, even after 3,000 years. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now with more on the grand spectacle. Keir, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. These are stunning images, aren't they? It's like something out of an Indiana Jones movie, a parade of mummies moving to a new home after more than a century. Egyptian mummies on the move. The Golden Parade, a multi-million-dollar procession through the streets of Cairo for Egypt's ancient rulers, 3,000 years after their burial. A guard of honor and a gun salute. 22 ancient mummies taken on a historic journey. The 4 queens and 18 kings, including Ramses the Great, one of Egypt's legendary pharaohs who ruled for more than 60 years.
The parade is very important, not only for Egypt, but for the whole world.
The mummies emerging from their cramped accommodation at Egypt's historic museum. We visited the museum in 2017. More than 100,000 artifacts were kept there. Not always safely. During Egypt's revolution in 2011, it was broken into and 50 objects were stolen. The mummy's new home, the state-of-the-art National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, will be safer and far more modern. The 3-mile parade, less than an hour long, made for TV and aimed at attracting tourists to Egypt again, with many local people from poor districts of Cairo prevented from attending. For the mummies themselves, a sophisticated process. The ancient bodies x-rayed and sealed in nitrogen, then kept in bespoke capsules and moved in special vehicles to keep them safe. Egypt has been making news lately, struggling with COVID infections, the blockage of the Suez Canal, and a deadly train crash. On social media, some even suggesting the parade was cursed.
Everyone said this is the curse of the mummies. But I said there is no curse of the mummies.
Egypt's ancient past, an ever-present influence on its future. And this weekend, the source of a truly stunning spectacle. And this really is about reviving Egypt's tourism industry. It's been decimated like so many tourism industries around the world. Joe's 20% of Egypt's economy, a $12 billion a year industry. They're hoping that you're going to sit at home, see these images and say to each other, let's try and get to Egypt when this is all over. Inevitably, though, Joe, there are those on social media who are saying, why, I think they're joking, why would you in 2021 unleash a bunch of cursed mummies onto the streets? They may have a point, my friend.
I guess we'll find out. Their questions will be answered soon, I guess. Keir, thank you so much. Fascinating story.
In Silicon Valley, some of the biggest names in tech are pushing to increase diversity within their workforce. NBC technology correspondent Jake Ward checked in on their efforts and why it's taking so long.
After the death of George Floyd and nationwide protests last summer, big tech funneled hundreds of millions into diversity and inclusion efforts. Facebook and Google each announced they wanted to increase underrepresented people in leadership positions by 30% within 5 years. But they're starting from a pretty low place. Black workers comprise between 3.7 and 9% of the workforce at major tech companies, according to our analysis of their latest disclosures. The numbers are even lower for technical roles. In leadership positions, also low. And the numbers have barely moved since most companies began releasing statistics in 2014. That discrepancy is prompting outrage from advocates, employees, even lawmakers.
There must be meaningful representation in your companies to design your products and services in ways that work for all Americans. History has shown that you have talked the talk, but have failed to walk the walk.
Oscar Venezi, a recruiter for Facebook, filed a federal equal employment complaint against the company last year for failing to fairly pay, evaluate, and promote him and other Black employees.
At this particular time, I would not tell any of my kids or allow any of my kids or anyone in my family to work in Silicon Valley. They wouldn't get my recommendation, that is.
And why is that?
It's very difficult. It's a difficult environment. It's an uncomfortable environment for minorities and especially for Black families.
We asked Facebook about the complaint. Here's what they said. We believe it is essential to provide all employees with a respectful and safe working environment. We take any allegations of discrimination seriously and investigate every case. Venezi is still at the company. There is a ready source of Black engineers, the nation's historically Black colleges and universities. HBCUs rank high on the list of schools awarding computer science and other relevant engineering degrees to Black students. That's based on data from the American Society for Engineering Education. But companies like Google have come under fire for underinvesting in HBCU relationships and for not adequately supporting the hires they made. We reached out to the best-known tech companies, and they all described either a relationship with HBCUs or ongoing diversity and inclusion efforts. Now, the numbers of Black math and engineering graduates have suffered in recent years. Oscar Barton, head of the engineering department at Morgan State University in Baltimore, says HBCUs need a deeper relationship with big tech to improve those numbers and to create a recruiting pipeline.
The Stanfords and the Caltechs and the MITs, Michigans, they've had that long-standing relationships with companies, and sometimes they have taken on blind faith that student X, because they graduated from University Y, is going to be the right fit. And it does not always work out. We need to be at the table to show that we provide the same experiences as those large, well-known institutions.
And the head of the American Society for Engineering Education says lofty corporate goals can be undercut by the breakneck race for profits in tech.
You talk to a CEO, they're looking for somebody who can make a long-term contribution to a company. They want somebody who has communication skills, teaming skills, strategic thinking skills, can contribute to the firm over the long term. That's what they want. A hiring manager has a very specific need that they were tasked with finding. I need somebody who can do X, Y, and Z immediately.
Venezi says hiring criteria like so-called culture fit wipes out qualified candidates.
If you say culture fit and this person is coming from a HBCU and this person here has only seen Black people on television, or in that sense, it only takes a little bit from one person to say that you're not a culture fit in order for you not to get into a company.
Venezi describes himself as a super fan of Facebook, and he thinks the company can have a meaningful impact on discrimination in tech.
I spent 23 years in the military, so we have struggled with this same issue for a long time. So I clearly recognize the signs when I'm at a company that struggles with diversity, because I've seen it at every company I've worked for since I was 17. But for the first time, I work for a company that I think will really make a change here and make a difference if it's well informed about what the concern is.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.